Welcome back to the conference. A disclaimer, also es geht jetzt weiter auf Englisch. Wer dafür eine Übersetzung braucht, kann sich da hinten nochmal Kopfhörer holen. So if you need a translation from English to German, you can get the necessary equipment in the back. Because now we've talked about the German army, the German Zeitenwende, and now we're moving towards 75 years of NATO, which is an amazing celebration, of course, and our head of the foundation mentioned this morning that we're celebrating 75 years of Germany, the Federal Republic, and 75 years of NATO. And I think, reaching this age already shows adaptability. I mean, NATO has been able to adapt from a Cold War scenario to a scenario of chosen wars, to a scenario of war against terror, to a scenario now again of wars that are necessary, or at least the preparation for wars that are necessary. So I hope everyone has the necessary equipment. My name is Christina Krause. Eileen Matley is ill, so she was unfortunately not able to join us today. I head the Department for International Politics and Security at Adenauer-Stiftung, and I have the pleasure to moderate this short but interesting panel. 75 years of NATO. So what has changed for NATO since 2014, or some of us start in 2008? Since we were able to see that Russia is not moving on the path of a partner, what has changed after the 24th of February 2022, where we saw the full-scale invasion of Russia and Ukraine? How is Ukraine supported by NATO? I mean, we have a Ramstein format and bilateral security agreements and so on. So what is NATO going to do? And the big summit upcoming in Washington, D.C., what is to be expected? These are some of the questions that we are going to deal with, and I'm very happy to have a wonderful panel here with me. On my right, we have General See. He's been with NATO in the past 5 years. He's the Deputy Assistant Secretary General in charge of defense planning. And he has experience in Afghanistan and Kosovo. And we've been talking every now and then, and your perspective on Zeitenwende and Zeitenwende on NATO is very interesting, so I'm looking forward to listening to that. Then on my left, we have Jukka Kopra. Finland is the big partner country that we celebrate today. After the foreign minister, I'm happy that Jukka Kopra is here with us. He's a member of parliament and the head of the defense committee. And then we have Elizabeth Hoffman. She's here from DC. So we can ask her, how is NATO perceived in DC? And this morning, we talked about Washington, and the system seems to be broken in a way. Is that true? And MP Peter Bayer this morning said, no, Washington isn't broken. So it's good, to have all of these different perspectives here. Elizabeth, you will be able to tell us more of, what can be changed, what can be expected from the elections, and what might change in the next White House. Although I understand your favorite building in the US, in Washington, is the Capitol. So she has a very parliamentarian, congressional perspective. And then with us, I'm also extremely happy that Peter Bayer made it. His perspective, not just as a transatlanticist, is important, but also through his work as the chair of the German Parliamentary Committee for dealing with Afghanistan, with dealing with 20 years of, trying to support the country, to stabilize not just, but also to start on a path towards democracy, rule of law, human rights. So you see, we have very different perspectives, and I'd like to start with General See to give us the insight perspective of NATO and how you look back at 75 years, but then of course also at this important summit in Washington.
Christina, thank you very much. And I just would like to start. I just came back from DC. The weather was fine, diplomatically speaking. So nothing about whether the system been broken, yes or no. 75 years, what does it say? I think it's just a success story. That's the best and most positive way of saying it. Why? I think there's going back to what we would call the root causes in terms of why do we have NATO. And this is standing together, one for all for one, fighting for common values, all of that, ready to defend each other's territory. We just heard the overwhelmingly positive numbers again from Finland today in terms of people set up to do that. And well, Finland and Sweden just joined us, fortunately. The last round of having more allies also made it clear NATO wants to be joined. There's something why nations want to join NATO and get under this kind of umbrella. My second quick point, if I may, on Russia. There was a lot of things had been said today already in terms of where are we on Russia. For me, it remains pertinent and it remains clear. An aggressive Russia, no change. Putin has not changed any kind of objectives. Ruthless behavior with regards to his own behavior, to his own population. Ruthless with regard to Ukraine and others. So we just need to be set and ready to think about a totally different Russia, unlike we had seen in the last strategic concept in 2010, where we thought Russia is going to be maybe a partner over longer time. So Russia, including the question in terms of reconstitution, how long might it take? We heard a couple of years of 5 to 8 today. You can go down to 4 to 6, always the questions to do what. I think the evidence we see in the industrial capacity build-up and all that, going to pre-war strength maybe within the next 5 years already, this is always and already quite telling, which simply underlines this is about us, this is about our security, our Euro-Atlantic security, and it's really urgent. So this is maybe my first part. I might come back a bit later to the summit or right now, up to you, but this would be my initial stage. Maybe one sentence further. Collective defense, and we heard in the last panel a bit on the German terminology, Kriegstüchtigkeit. What has changed? Over 30 years, it was us to take decisions what to do and where and when, with how many people, yes or no. Collective defense is the opposite. Somebody, Putin maybe, might tell us, or somebody else, what needs to be done. And then an entire alliance needs to be ready, and not just about a couple of people and just a couple of things where we might take decisions upon. And the time is not on our side. We need to prepare.
In a very good podcast that you made with Claudia Major from SVP, you pointed out that NATO's work is more real and relevant now. So take us into the headquarters. Tell us what has changed, because I mean, has what we're discussing in Germany, this, you know, a new time, a new era, how has that reached NATO headquarters and you in your daily work?
Well, the simple point would be saying more, just more work. But the point is, and what I said in the podcast, we already had plans and ideas in place going back to 2021, getting a bit into the military world. We started developing a concept which was called the Concept for Deterrence and Defense, with an idea to develop a strategic plan, with an idea to develop regional plans. And all of which helped us in 2022 in February, because we were already, let's say, prepared with a mindset to do that better. And since then, over the summits in Madrid and in Vilnius, we took a whole agenda in terms of decisions made by the heads of states for military adaptation, more ready forces, better plans, better command and control, more readiness, which is in itself a huge endeavor to achieve within the armed forces. And we just had a couple of questions today when it comes to what readiness really means and what would it require. Developing capabilities, and by the way, capabilities and development is not procuring a platform. This is about the platform, training, education, personnel. Then you have a capability. That's the military side of it. And in the same division I have the pleasure to serve in, we also look at the civil side of the house. We just discussed resilience a bit. What does it mean? Article 3 of the NATO Treaty, security of supply chains. security of communications, your mobile phone, who can hack in, who not. How do we make sure we have the goods and the raw materials in stock already without having, let's say, any kind of disrupted thing? So there's a huge resilience element on the civil side as well that need to go together, including the question of industrial capacity, including the question of defense spending. Not getting into details now, we might have some questions on that. So putting the military adaptation and the civil adaptation together, what we call deterrence, defense, resilience, and I think then we are on a way, in German terms again, to be kriegstüchtig or to be more ready, or in the end, just set in a position where we can say we can successfully deter and defend as required. And this is really daily business, and including chairing the meetings, agreeing with 32 allies, and we had the fair question today from a colleague over there. Sometimes not easy, that's my diplomatic voice on that, to get everybody on board. However, my question would be, what's the alternative? So find the common denominator on the highest level possible, not on the lowest, on the highest. And just to bring things up and running and make it up and running. I think this is daily business in the headquarters. A nice building, by the way.
Very impressive and transparent building, too. Jukka Kopra, General Say actually said after the 24th of February 22, he said Putin made a strategic mistake in invading Ukraine because he forced many countries, among them Sweden and Finland, to join NATO. So tell us about that momentum, because before the 24th of February, no one thought, and the population surely wasn't interested in Finland. Were you surprised?
Well, actually, we have to go 10 years back to 2014, because 2014 and the attack on Crimea was the eye-opener in Finland. We didn't, as we Finns, we never, make a fuss about anything. We're sort of silent workers, so we didn't make much fuss about that either, but we started improving and renovating our capabilities after 2014. So you could say that we started building Article 3 capabilities back then. So we renovated our conscription system, our reserve system. For example, before 2014, it took 3 months to call reservists to service for refreshing training or emergency training. Now we can do it immediately. Things like that. But of course then February 22 was a shock for everybody, including us too. Nobody wanted to believe that Russia would be so brutal that they would unprovokedly attack Ukraine, but nevertheless they did. And that sort of started the process to solve the question that nobody actually earlier wanted to solve. Should we join NATO or no? We had always, pushed the question behind other questions and didn't want to think about that. But now we realize that, okay, now is the time to think about this. And in January, by coincidence, there was a poll in January 22 among Finnish people that should we join NATO, and approximately 20% of the Finns said that yes, 70% said no, and 10% were thinking. Now, fast forward to March 22, 80% of the Finns said, yeah, let's join NATO now. So that's how it happened, and that gave us, the politicians, the momentum, because the people of Finland wanted to join NATO. So after that, it was just a breeze to join, put in the application, and thanks to you guys and other allied members, we were accepted very quickly to be members of NATO.
Elisabeth Hoffmann, we in Germany take the US support for granted. And we've been doing this for a long time. They've been there, they've been supporting us. Big parts of the population are skeptical. Why is the US here? What are they doing? And we just recently dug out a paper that Senator Biden in the 90s wrote for us, where he asked for burden sharing. So how do you perceive the war in Europe, and how do you perceive what Germany and the EU countries are doing?
Thank you, Christina. So I might not talk so much how I perceive it, because I think it's going to be very similar to the folks on the panel, but how the average American perceives the war. And I think the average American feels like the war is very far away, not particularly relevant to their lives. Meanwhile, the US economy, while the numbers look good, people don't feel good about the economy. Prices have risen, inflation is very high, and people are uneasy about the situation at home. And so I think, and frankly, President Biden is not very popular. That's no secret. You look at a poll. Neither is former President Trump, frankly. We're in a bit of a strange situation where Americans are being forced to choose between two candidates who are not particularly popular. But there is a certain feeling, I think, that what you're seeing in the polls now, with Trump pulling ahead in many swing states, of a rejection of kind of the status quo. And again, I would just emphasize how real kind of the economic feeling of insecurity is. And thank you to the foundation. We've had the opportunity to spend the past few days in Germany, and I think it struck me how similar kind of the political situation here, this feeling, talking about how people feel left behind, very similar to kind of what's happening in the United States. And so it's concerning going into next year, into a possible even if the administration doesn't change, quite frankly. Congress controls the money. You saw in how long it took to pass assistance to Ukraine, and not just Ukraine. It took just as long to pass that supplemental for Israel as well, as the Indo-Pacific. And so it's concerning. I think a lot more needs to be done to message to the American people why what's happening in Europe is relevant and important, why I feel alarmist when I say this, but kind of the situation both in the United States and around the world is very reminiscent of what we saw in the 1930s, and we don't want to get there where it takes an attack on US soil for the US to finally engage, but I fear that if there's not a real kind of effort to make the American people understand that, that's the direction we're heading. Yeah, I guess not a particularly upbeat message. It's very concerning. I will say, on a note of optimism, I don't know how much attention this really received, but a small provision in the National Defense Authorization Act, was passed, was put into law, requiring 2/3 of the Senate to approve a U.S. withdrawal from NATO. The legality of that provision is questionable. Whether it's actually enforceable is questionable if a Trump administration, for example, were to try to withdraw from NATO. But it does send a signal that the United States, the vast majority of people, are still committed to NATO, certainly policymakers, senators, members of Congress. But I do think there is still cause for concern. And really the biggest thing that can be done, I think, to shift and to really take the wind out of the argument, why are we in NATO, is for NATO countries to really make a big effort in the next, what do we have, 7 months now, 8 months, to hit that 2% mark.
Burden sharing, 2%.
Yes.
Yeah. Well received, the message. Peter Bayer, we talked this morning and also the afternoon about moving from wars of choice to a war of necessity, or preparing for a war of necessity at least. You chair the committee that looks at the past 20 years that Germany has focused on Afghanistan, international crisis missions, but also concerning development aid. What would you say, with your knowledge and with the work in the committee, what will be the most important takeaways from your committee work? Also vis-a-vis now prioritizing our security strategy.
Thank you very much, Christina. Just to clarify, I'm not the chairman of the Study Committee on Afghanistan. I'm just the spokesperson of the CDU-CSU parliamentary group. which I'm proud of, but also a lot of work. But Michael Müller from the SPD is chairing this committee. But anyway, great question. Just to explain just a little bit the work of the study committee on Afghanistan, it's for almost half a year. We have already, about half a year ago, we finished our work on Afghanistan and looking into the future, because the better part of our work is not looking behind to Afghanistan, but lessons learned and giving recommendations for the future integrated strategic approach for German foreign politics. So it's quite something, keeps us super busy across the political party lines, so that's what we are busy with currently. And lessons learned, it's a lot on the political side, on the practical side. We have published our intermediate report, about 500-600 pages, and we had a presentation here some months ago in this very room on this part. So I'm not repeating this; everybody can read this. But if you're asking me that, what are the major takeaways from this work, from our lessons learned from the experience from Afghanistan, 20 years of German engagement in Afghanistan, one of the things was. Yes, first, there was a reason why we were going. It was unconditional full solidarity with our American friends, that I would support this still, if this happened. First time ever, Article 5 triggered of the Washington Treaty. And so that was the start, but it was a completely black box for our folks getting into, for the military personnel, for the policemen, and everyone else following at the beginning. Also due to the fact that the American friends were not so much willing in the beginning, especially to share intelligence with us. But so we're concentrating on our German takeaways, and one of the things that we really learned that were shared with us of almost everyone who served there was lack of transparency, lack of honesty, and lack of coordination within the government, and evolvement and development over the time of the 20 years, of the almost 2 decades of German engagement there. It was more like time-driven, not conditions-based, and that sort of changed. And it could not be overestimated or overemphasized that much better coordination. There was a lot of competition, like it is today, in a German coalition government amongst the different ministries, the Chancellery, the Federal Foreign Office, the Defense Ministry, and all the other ministries that were involved in this out-of-area mission. Not everyone has not in every country there is a coalition government, but this is a fact here. At least 2-3 parties are here forming the German government. There's a lot of competition. So the Federal Foreign Office led by the Greens or the Social Democratic or the FDP, the Chancellery by CDU or SPD. So there's a lot of unwillingness actually to work efficiently, to pull on the same side of the strings. So one of the things that I was listening carefully, what the general was sitting here before was saying with regard to the National Security Council, the Bundessicherheitsrat is certainly not the thing that is fulfilling faintly this job. So I think we need something that might be called the National Security Council, but some body that has competence, that is fully equipped with personnel which is funded in a way that it can do its work, and which is something which is an authority that can, beyond the ressort principle, actually coordinate these things. And it is not only with regard to out of area missions, or in some remote country, but it's also with regard to strategic foresight, coordination. And last thing that I wanted to mention is one of the things that we're currently working on and discussing in the study committee, also a lessons learned from Afghanistan of the mistakes that have been made. It's not only about the government and a lack of coordination and honesty and transparency, but also on the parliament side. The Foreign Relations Committee, where I've been a member of for 15 years now almost, is in the lead. But also there's a lack of coordination and cooperation within the parliament. So we're currently discussing something like a committee that is trying to accompany missions, an Einsatzkomitee, Ausschuss, and a committee that deals with strategic foresight, which is allocated to the parliament with external experts and with parliamentarians. And J.D. Bindennagel is my hero on strategic foresight. He's sitting right here, former U.S. ambassador to Germany. Many years ago, he has already presented this idea very prominently.
From the report, I understand that especially the part and role of the Bundeswehr, and I'm so happy that we have soldiers here with us today, that was evaluated in a very positive way, because I guess the mandate was the clearest, most clear. I'd like to have a look, because I mean, when the back out, when the withdrawal from Afghanistan came in such a sudden way, I mean, it felt for soldiers like we've lost this, you know? And which was extremely depressing and frustrating. But I think, especially NATO, with an abundance of missions they're involved in, and also partnership models, I think it's important also to highlight what is working well, and to look at not just the 32 members in NATO, but also the very successful partnership programs. And I'd be happy, General Zee, if you could just point out a few of them, highlight success stories. I mean, not just the 75 years of NATO where it's been able to adapt to situations, but even, you know, forming partnerships all around the globe.
If I may, just two quick points on what just been said, because that's really relevant when it comes to burden sharing and 2%. The Vilnius language was very clear, minimum. And I think we have a good understanding, if not a recognition already, that 2% will not cut it anyway. When you start translating money into capabilities, you need that. Whether it's 2.5, 3 points, whatsoever, that's a different question, nationally different, and many nations have already stepped up, spending much more. And the burden sharing between Europe and the US, I think there should be, and there is, I think, equal interest on either sides to make that happen. And we as Europeans in particular just need to take that more seriously, as we had been doing so in the past. My second quick point is on the Security Council. It seems to be a bit of a trendy point today. I just mentioned the military adaptation and the civil side, and I think, however we call that, we need some element which combines military, civil planning, thinking, and coordination. That's the point in the end, to make that in one, to put it in one hand to go forward, at least with an opportunity or the authority to do that. On partnerships, and I think my first point would be in terms of, we fully recognize as a Euro-transatlantic organization that global security matters for NATO, that security in the Euro-Atlantic area matters for the globe. So there's nothing you can really actually discriminate in the future. It's just one big piece together. So the most ongoing discussion I think we have when it comes to partnerships, and when NATO starts talking about partnerships, I'm here as a NATO official, we start with the EU as a strategic partner, looking to other partnership elements. We have an expert group on the South, because we've clearly understood that working, let's say, with North African countries, Morocco, Tunisia, and others, just to give you some examples, is absolutely vital to go forward in the future, because this is not isolated. This is just the cross-border side in our south. And it matters for us, and it matters not only for the southern allies, it matters for all of us, because in the end it's our entire security. And I think there's much more we can do in terms of practical advice, practical cooperation. Why I think that's the case is quite simple. There was a notion today on Russia in terms of being isolated maybe. I don't think Russia is isolated. There's Russia-China, there's Russia-Iran, there's Russia-North Korea. There was the BRICS question and all that. So actually when we talk about partnerships, we should be simply fairly pragmatic and say, do we want them to go finally to Russia, to China, to North Korea? Or are we attractive as a model enough, both when it comes to values and what we can offer, and they just turn to us? And I think we need to be fairly pragmatic when we look into our partnerships, and there's a lot of work ongoing. And the most particular one with regards to the summit is clearly looking into the Indo-Pacific. We have strong partnerships with Australia, with South Korea, with Japan, and they perceive the same issue when it comes to global security, looking at China, looking at Russia. There's a lot of things we share, which is clearly in the interest also of the US as well. What kind of role NATO could have there? Let's see how far we can go in the summit. But I think, again, we should be pragmatic. This is sharing of information. This is sharing of intelligence. This is sharing maybe of documents, which is not possible now. It may end up even in common exercises or just going through the Strait of Taiwan, maybe not with the NATO shipping, but maybe just with allies doing it, which is already the case anyway. I think there's, as you said, there's a plethora of opportunities where we are already good at and where we put a lot of partners on our side, but I think we need to be much more cognizant of the potential which lies in this partnership engagement and just not saying we have partners and we need to think about that. We have a vital interest in more intense integration of our partners.
I mean, we used to think, or at least after the 24th of February, we thought, okay, Russia is now the big challenge. And then the 7th of October happened, and we saw that also that area of the Middle East is not at peace. And I'm happy to welcome also a delegation here from Djibouti, Somalia, and Somaliland too, with Niels Wörmer, my colleague, because what you're witnessing in Djibouti is also this geopolitical race of interests and of instability by that. So it's definitely also a global issue, and security is an issue that you cannot see isolated just for Europe or just for the US or just for China. But let's go to the 75 big summit in Washington, D.C. Elizabeth, what would you say? What do you expect will happen in July?
Well, I defer to my colleague from NATO to really talk about the substance, but I can talk about what I'd hope to see. I hope to see, some really positive messaging and coming around kind of what I talked about before, why NATO matters, why this is relevant to the US, why the average American should care and be committed to the fact that we're in NATO and why that's important. And as was just stated, insecurity anywhere is going to eventually come back to affect the United States. And that message really needs to resonate. And I really would like our partners to take the opportunity, our allies to take the opportunity to showcase what they are doing, how far they have come, and I hope that message comes across very clearly, how Europe has really stepped up in light of what's happened in Ukraine. I think that's critically important for the American, not just, for policymakers too. Frankly, you hear this narrative, even with policymakers, that Europe isn't doing enough. And aside from the security component, I do think it's important to acknowledge the humanitarian component also, that Europe has really, really stepped up. I mean, Poland, Germany, Sweden, the enormous number of refugees, of Ukrainian refugees that Europe has integrated so quickly, has provided services for, has put to work. I really think that that's an important emphasis that people in the United States don't quite understand. So I hope that both of those messages are really loud and clear.
Yes,
Just, Christina, if I may, just in addition to that, I think, first of all, to your question, what to expect, first traffic jams in Washington, D.C. But anyway, so seriously, I think it's a bold statement to make to have this summit now in the U.S. presidential election year in the very city, in the Beltway in Washington, D.C., a bold one and a good one, because for all the right points that Elizabeth just said, it hopefully transports a message to the U.S. citizens. I'm not overly optimistic that this will really resonate with the U.S. citizens. Maybe especially within the election year, maybe it goes the other way, that it's counterproductive. But again, I think it's good to have it, and at least we should try to try to bring over the message, to communicate not only to U.S. citizens, but because it is happening on the summit on U.S. soil. Why NATO is relevant also for their own interests, security interests, not only between the Pacific Ocean and the Atlantic Ocean and between Canada and Mexico, but beyond. And we see, and I just want to add that, we're talking about these theaters where security interests are happening. We will, to me, I think certainly also see, regardless of who's going to win the elections on November 5 and who is taking office on January 20th next year, that we will see a relocation, a reshifting of US troops, maybe more radical and definite under a Republican president with a stock taking for conventional troops in Europe, and a relocation into the Indo-Pacific. And also, I mean, I think I mentioned that earlier this morning on this panel, but I also think belongs here. So the term scarcity, limited personnel and military equipment capabilities of the United States of America, they're not capable to lead two wars at the same time anymore. And and it's unpopular and everything. So definitely, regardless of the outcome of the elections in November, that we will see continued changes where we need to prepare. The general said a lot of good things, which I can only underline, but it needs a lot of political will as well to contribute, not only financially. So I'm quite happy to see that the discussion is not only anymore about these 2%. It's important. We should commit to this. It's this very year, 10 years after the Wales NATO summit in November 2014. 10 years after this, we should reach 2%. But it's even more. It's a modernization. It's make it more efficiency, make it more relevant, go into cyber and into outer space as well, which is also extremely important.
And make it more known what NATO is doing. Evelyn Mattei from IRSEM, the French think tank, pointed out yesterday, she's over there, that when NATO started, there were trucks, buses going to the member countries, giving out the message of what NATO meant and what it was, going to the countryside, being present in not just in the capitals, not just in the parliaments or in the governments. And I think that's also very important to spread the knowledge about NATO. There are many more questions that I would have, but this is your chance. We have 15 more minutes. Oh, wonderful. Please, I'm going to collect 3 questions, and you please start.
Hello, thank you so much. My name is Linda Bach. I'm a research analyst with the Bundeswehr Center for Public Military Affairs. I'm trying to ask 2 questions, but you don't have to answer them if you want to give other people a chance. My first question would be in regards to NATO partnerships. I worked on the Partnerships Directorate back in 2021, and it did not feel like there were a lot of resources or will from headquarters to really put partnerships to use the way they could be used. And I'd like to know which resources or plans have been provided and adapted since around 2020 to really use partnerships the best way they could be used. And my second question is both to General Z, but also to Mrs. Hoffman, and it is in regard to defending democracy and information resilience. And I'd like to know what NATO is doing in that regard and how the transatlantic relationship is working or not in regards to disinformation. Thank you.
Thank you. And then we have you right here and the gentleman back there.
Thank you. Susan Stewart, Stiftung Wissenschaft und Politik, or SWP. I have a question. It goes back to the discussion that we've been having about the national security strategy here in Germany, and also the question of this non-existent National Security Council. And it seems to me that this discussion points to a lack of kind of spaces for strategic planning, strategic thinking in the German context. And since it's kind of, the panel is also about looking back, and it can be it can be helpful to understand the reasons for the lack of something in order to try to create these spaces. I just wonder, I guess especially to the German participants on the panel, whether you share this feeling that these spaces for strategic thinking are missing to some extent, and why that is. Why in the past these spaces have not been created. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Cedric Kortenbrook. I'm studying international war studies and also have like a military background. You talked a lot about NATO and Russia, but you haven't talked about China and the Pacific. And I'm asking myself, what role NATO will play in a situation where the tensions in the Pacific will rise, and what kind of role the European countries should take in such a situation. Thanks.
Happy to start with the last question, and clearly within a couple of minutes it's hard to tackle everything. China, the question is, are we going forward at the right pace? We have come a long way already, I think. In the leaders' meeting in December in London, we had the first mentioning ever where NATO puts itself into context somehow to China. And we ended up in language now in the strategic concept on China. We can happily debate whether this is going far enough. And then I can simply say within 32 allies, we have some different paces on that. The more military, I think the easier to get on in terms of we need to monitor, we need to assess. The more it gets into the economic layers, the more it might be difficult. However, and this is also with regards to the US, and I just came back from the US, there's clearly a component in there where we need to find our way, our strategy, our ambition with regards to China and what we are willing to pay for that. This is all about, again, on economic independency, on independency on raw materials or whatsoever. I think we have achieved quite a lot, and I think this debate will just continue. And NATO's, I think for now at least, and getting a bit more into the closest crocodile to the boat, which is the summit, I think we can agree on fairly clear language on China, but going further, then this is strategic competition, maybe not even a pacing challenge as in the US paper, something in between. So whether there is a NATO role as an organization in that area with regards to China directly, I don't know. Let's see where the allies would like to go. We are, I think, in a fairly, let's say, pushing camp on that just to go further. Spaces for strategic thinking. I was just glad to learn that somebody was here from the strategic foresight world, as we had implemented, not as a result, but I think also with some recognition of there's a need to think, apart from what our military colleagues do, in the Allied Transformation Command, when it comes to strategic foresight analysis, we implemented a bit of a model which is very familiar to the Americans, talking about net assessment, which looks a bit like talking about cables, but it's just the opposite. It's really looking into, let's say, connecting pieces, doing comparisons, looking really independently into the future, thinking about what could be done. So I think fully recognized there is a need to look further. And I think we have started establishing that as a part of a mechanism for having better decision-making then. But that's not the only answer, but this is one of the most tangible one, just being reflected in our own division. Walking backwards up, we had the defend of democracy and disinformation. I think maybe one of the biggest issues over the last years, not only in 2022, but even before, maybe starting in 2014, and my Finnish colleague was absolutely right to hint at that again. What is right, what is wrong? Role of Stratcom, grey shaded, everything. Sometimes we don't even know what's true and whom we should believe. You know the long debates we had in the, let's say, a bit in the run-up to the Russian war against Ukraine in terms of what kind of intelligence matters. In the end, it's all about the more information you have, better sharing, put a picture together, and Tina Conlon was in the morning a different panel. But putting this together, I think, puts us in a better position to start recognizing where disinformation might start and where it ends. And then I think we have implemented in one of our divisions a fairly good capability already when it comes to cyberspace threats and all that, recognizing that and just thinking about how we can actually develop the expertise to deal with that. And I think especially when it comes to strategic communications, that's maybe the biggest way, the biggest asset to go against that, and just making clear what you somehow can read somewhere is simply not true. And then we have to make clear, and we need to explain again, what is the truth in the end? Because we are, and I think if we had now colleagues from Lithuania, Estonia here, they could tell you stories about disinformation every day, from the morning into the evening, how they are being exposed to Russian disinformation. But there's a lot ongoing as well. Partnership programs, I indicated that a bit. I'm very honest with you. I think latest with February 2022, but since 2014, there was clearly a bit of a reorientation into collective defense into Russia. I'm not saying without neglecting the role of partnerships, but again, scarce resources, political focus, agendas. It was very much on the agenda to look into this direction. I think latest the decision, the NATO 2030 expert group, and now added on with the expert group on South, which just came up with a report doing, I think, a list of 16 or 17 recommendations how to think better and more professionally on partners and partner engagement. Let's see how we can agree and where nations can agree in the summit on that, but it's clearly one of the biggest ones, and it starts from the left end in terms of special envoys over bigger role on counterterrorism, over bigger programs on interoperability. I don't know whether this will be agreed in the end. I'm just saying there's an expert report. It's public, if I'm correctly informed. I think so. You can read that. And well, sometimes classification is just somewhere for me. You can read it. And in the end, the foreign ministers and the heads of states need to take their decision, what's been brought forward. The nutshell is we need to be better on our partnerships. And again, my point on that is really we need to think where we would like to see our partners, on some side or on our side. I would very much prefer on our side without having them finally maybe as an ally, that's not the point, but having them when it comes to values, to democracy, to thinking, to what is worth sharing and defending, happily to have them on our side. And then we have to work on this and not just take it for granted. I think I took four questions roughly.
On the dis and misinformation piece, I mean, the United States is frankly behind here. The EU has passed legislation. The US isn't anywhere near that, to be honest, and I don't think we're going to get anywhere near that anytime soon. It became so political following, both the 2016 and the 2020 election, and we're kind of have twisted ourselves into a knot on this topic. We're very caught up with definitions, how to protect free speech, obviously, is a core component of the Constitution, but we're really just kind of talking past each other on this topic. So unfortunately, I don't see real progress, at least legislatively, being made anytime soon. And frankly, the US needs to be looking to places like Finland, who do a really good job with resilience, education, and looking to kind of model how can we bring that into our system. But right now, I think the debate has become so political that we're really just not going to see progress anytime soon, unfortunately. And a quick point on kind of NATO and Indo-Pacific, I think the United States will certainly be pushing, this is like the one area that is bipartisan in Washington, D.C. You say China and everybody comes together. Everything else we're very divided on. But I do think in that context, I'm sure the United States will be asking allies to do more. And this kind of goes back to the original question. I think it's important also for NATO member countries to remind the United States that they did stand next to us in Afghanistan in the global war on terror. And, with Russia looming, that the same should be expected in a threat that's really much more existential to the alliance. And so I do think that point should be emphasized as the United States does push on the Indo-Pacific.
As we are running out of time, unfortunately, I would have loved to take all of the answers, but we have 3 more minutes. I'd like to connect the question of disinformation with, combating hybrid warfare and your concept in Finland of total defense, which, draws a lot of attention. We just heard from the US, definitely from Germany. It's kind of scary, like, gosh, what is that? So do give us an insight, Jukka Kopra.
Well, in 2 minutes, okay, I'll try. Well, we have, yes, this concept of comprehensive security. It means that all levels and all different areas of society are tied in together, thinking the defense of Finland and maintaining the societal security in the country. We have this security committee which steers, all the heads of ministries are in the security committee, and it sort of sees that each sector of government is handling these comprehensive security measures properly. We have a resilience building system so that we buy gasoline, grain, food, medicine. We have storages for those. We have kept bomb shelters in Finland. We started building them after Second World War. So below Helsinki we can house tens of thousands of people in case of emergency. not everybody, but most of the people have a shelter, and we actually in our legislation is a statute that if you build a apartment building, you have to build a shelter too. So it's a regulation, and this is what we do in Finland, and we've been doing this for a long time. We think the system works happily or good, and then in order to increase the awareness of the importance of this system, we have this concept of defense courses in Finland. So every leader who is in a major position, leading a stock company or in a government organization as a CEO, goes to a defense course in Finland. It's a 3-week course. They get free from work then, and they get acquainted in our defense and in our comprehensive security system. And also, it's a good place to network with each other. So all the key players know each other by face. So we know each other. So if you're a chairman in some company and you need to ask something from a ministry, you most likely know your counterpart over there already. So you can call him or her and ask your question or deliver a service or something like that. So I think it's a good system. Of course it needs development, and in our government program there is a sort of goal to streamline the steering of this comprehensive security system, so we can improve it even further.
Thank you so much. I mean, I'm really sorry because you are so eager and interested, and this is a wonderful panel, but we will continue discussing and talking about NATO tomorrow night at 6 p.m. The Deputy NATO General Secretary is going to be here in this room. He's from Romania, and he will share, I mean, today we got the Finnish, and the German and the American, but tomorrow we will see, how does a country in the southern part of the eastern flank feel about the war in Ukraine, and how does he feel about NATO and NATO at 75? And you're very, very cordially invited to continue discussing NATO then. And otherwise, there are many programs, discussions, and also briefings. If you're interested, then contact with us. And I'm very thankful that you made it to Konrad-Adenauer-Stiftung, and please come back again. And thank you for everyone here. And all the best, and hopefully we'll celebrate wonderful 100th of birthday, or let's celebrate 76 years, and then hopefully a peaceful European environment.
Thank you.